It's also really nice because, humanity continues. Like, we have to make babies in order for that to happen, and in order to make babies, we have to have sex.
The economy is really bad, and it can be hard to be in the mood if you live with a lot of roommates, or if you haven't been able to leave your parents' house.
Roommates are not what's stopping sex.
Yeah, we had sex everywhere.
Yeah.
Women are still desiring marriage because last time I checked, it wasn't mandatory.
For young women, it's just very clear that marriage may not be the best source of financial protection and dignity.
Should marriage still be the goal?
Yes.
Is monogamy over?
No, but it could be.
This is Open to Debate. I'm Nick Gillespie. Welcome to our series called Generational Divides. Today, we're bringing together people of different ages, a Gen Xer, a Millennial, and a Zoomer, to discuss sex and relationships. It's such a big part of our lives, but we can still be awkward and avoid talking about it. Dating and sexual norms in the U.S. have come a long way since our Puritan ancestors. Early courtship was strategic, formal, and typically didn't prioritize romantic love. The concept of dating wasn't even really invented until the late 19th century. Going steady came about in the 1950s. Then there were the sexual revolutions of the 1960s and 70s. Now there's hookup culture, love bombing, and situationships. Over time, romance has broadened to become less rigid, more inclusive, but always really confusing. You might remember your grandparents telling you how they met. It may have seemed so simple, so uncomplicated by dating apps. In fact, one set of my grandparents had an arranged marriage. So do older generations have it all figured out, or have the kids stumbled onto something? Today, we want to hear what different generations think about dating trends, our changing attitudes towards sex, the rise of non-monogamy, and more. A note before we continue, we'll be covering some controversial and intimate topics, and I want to say to our participants, let's keep all the blows above the belt. All right, first, I want to welcome our Gen Zer, Malavika Kannan. She's the author of the new novel, Unprecedented Times. She's taught at Stanford. Her work has appeared in New York Magazine, Vulture, The Washington Post, and more. She also has a relationship advice column with Teen Vogue. Welcome, Malavika.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Carolyn D. Gorman, our millennial voice. Carolyn is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, where she researches how policy impacts people with mental illness. She served on the U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and she often examines the cultural norms that young people are navigating as they grow up in the U.S. Welcome.
Thank you.
And finally, we have James Sexton, our Gen Xer. He's a New York-based attorney whose practice focuses on divorce and family law. His clients include everyone from Fortune 500 CEOs to entertainment personalities to stay-at-home moms. He is the author of the book, How to Stay in Love. Welcome, James.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
All right, let's start talking about our first topic, is should Gen Z have more sex? We've all seen studies from the CDC, the Kinsey Institute, and places like that that show that Gen Z is having less sex than generations before did at the same age. Let's start with our Zoomer. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a big deal?
I fundamentally think that any moral panic over who is or isn't having sex is sometimes just not super productive.
And that's why Gen Z women are having less sex.
I think that if you are uninterested in entering a sexual playing field that is uneven, and when there's a power dynamic that perhaps previous generations would have been conditioned to accept or even eroticize, I don't blame people who are not in the mood in those conditions.
The interesting thing is every generation has seen a decline in the amount of sex that they're having as a young person. And I think what that tells me is whatever our sort of persistent message has been, something's wrong with that. What we've done is change the incentives around sex and responsibility, and specifically responsibility from men. The advent of birth control and the normalization of sex outside of marriage made there much less reason for men to feel obligated to women to stay in a married relationship. So women might have had more control over what happens if sex happens, but if they can't find a partner, they're exposed to more physical safety risks because men are less invested in the conversation. They're faced with economic risk. If they get pregnant, they can't terminate the child or don't want to, and then have to support the child on their own. And so I think we have tried to make things better for women, and the deal hasn't always paid off.
Okay, James, what are you thinking?
I mean, to the core question, I think young people should be having more sex. I think they just should, because I think anything that gets them off their phones is good. So I think anything
even if it's sex, they're
just
watching
whatever
sex,
it is.
they're watching
Honestly,
porn,
I
but it's
mean,
like,
certainly sex is one of the most enjoyable things we can do with our bodies. I hope we can all agree on that. I mean, I enjoy yoga. I think roller coasters are fun, but I think almost anything I'm doing, having sex would be more fun. That seems that shouldn't necessarily be a controversial topic if it was occurring just from a pure physical sensation standpoint. But I mean, everything that I'm hearing here is exactly the kinds of things I hear when I talk to young people. I think what's happened with the proliferation of social media is everyone now identifies as heavily aggrieved.
Yeah.
And if you're basically caught up in how aggrieved you are, why would you want to spend time with the enemy? So I think it's understandable that there's a massive boys versus girls war that is only getting fed more and more by the algorithm. And a side effect of that is that people aren't feeling connection, they aren't feeling closeness, and they're not feeling safe. Because I don't think anyone can feel loved unless they feel safe.
Well, I was going to say, I agree with you that like gender relations are incredibly polarized right now. And I think that the metaphor that you brought up earlier to me really signals that. Like, sex to me is not like riding a roller coaster, because a roller coaster is not something that has power dynamics baked in. It's not a politicized thing that you could be doing. There aren't the same risks attached to it. But I agree that there has been like profound gender polarization between young men and young women about the basic assumptions and expectations behind sex. It doesn't help that like many young people in this country, including myself, grew up without any form of sex ed, let alone like comprehensive sex ed. And something that I have noticed personally, and like there are many potential things to blame, porn could in fact be one of them, that the baseline expectations between young men and young women are very different.
But
the consequences are very different. Like what to a young man might feel like routine sex, to a young woman does in fact land in her body as a profound violation. And we could like invalidate the other's perspective.
But why wouldn't a woman then stop having that sex?
Well, they would, right? Isn't that the point? I mean, if you're buying that argument, they have, because Gen Z is having less sex. Although the drop-off is much higher among young men. What is the role of technology in this? And maybe it's not as simple as saying it's online porn or it's phones, but is it fundamentally, is it the information that people are being fed through some kind of online culture?
I mean, I would say it plays two roles. I do think that for young men, like access to things like porn has like severely warped their perception of like what women want and like inhibited their ability to connect to them. But I would say for women like myself, the effect of the internet is something much more akin to what consciousness raising would have done for like feminists of a previous generation. I think problems that I might have otherwise been convinced to internalize or think were just my fault, I've come to understand are conditions faced by a lot of women, which suggests that it's a broader political one.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, though, in the wake of consciousness raising, certainly in the early 70s, women had more sex. They felt empowered to have sex on their terms, whereas you're talking about this current kind of moment of consciousness raising is women withdrawing from a sexual forum or whatever the right word is.
I think something that you said earlier was very resonant, and that is that sex education has vanished. And I think it's vanished because politically, there's such an argument about what should be included in a sexual education curriculum. And I think sexual education hasn't disappeared at all. It's just become porn for most young men.
This idea that sex education has vanished, again, I'm a boomer and I went to Catholic school, so I can guarantee you I did not only get negative zero sex education, I got something beyond
We
zero.
have the shared trauma.
But we had sex.
I think kids are going to get this, teens are going to get this, whether or not it's formal. Do I trust the education system to provide that or provide that well? We can't teach kids to read, so why would we expect them to be able to?
Well, then maybe the sex ed is working finally, where kids are not having sex.
I'm pretty sure that's not the case.
One part of the conversation that I think we're really leaving out is that one very big predictor of how much sex happens is whether people live together, and we just don't see the same rates.
And by that you mean in a cohabitating space.
In a cohabitated space. We don't see the same rates of marriage, and we don't see the same rates of live-in relationships. So that is mechanically going to lower the amount of sex.
You know, everybody's having less sex than they had 50 years ago, regardless of the age, kind of broadly. But then when you look at younger people, how much does the fact that like more young people live with their parents, is that part of the issue? How does something like COVID fit into this, where there was a period of forced isolation during a formative era of younger people, particularly Gen Z's life? Is that at play here?
I think that's absolutely at play here. The economy is really bad, and it can be hard to be in the mood if you like live with like a lot of roommates, or if you haven't been able to leave your parents' house. So I think that that's definitely part of it.
I don't know. I think young people, I've lived in New York, and everyone has a bad New York roommate story, and roommates are not what's stopping sex.
Yeah, we had sex everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, we had sex everywhere. We had sex in cars. We had sex in, we had sex, it wasn't like, oh no, I live with my parents.
But that was
Your
before
bad roommate
We
seatbelt.
lived with our parents, but I mean, we had sex. Like, you found ways to have sex.
So, well, then what is it though? Is it, is it higher levels of depression, or higher levels, and I'm not even sure that this is the case, of prescriptions of SSRIs, which sometimes lower sex drive? I mean, how much of this is organic? How much of it is ideological?
I think there is a definite ideological play here. And what that is there is no longer a very clear playbook for how you interact with the other sex.
Right.
Men don't know how to approach women because they're scared of being accused of being harassed. Maybe they want to make sure that a woman doesn't feel like they are, being patronized too. And so they don't interact with women. And then, if we don't have a playbook or expectations around social norms, you just don't get that interaction to ever happen. You've sort of few low pressure, low cost opportunities for people to interact. I think that happened, COVID really exacerbated that, definitely, but that existed before, certainly.
But we've always treated, this culture has always treated dandruff with decapitation. Like, we've always found ways to overcorrect. And so, the idea of saying, well, men were told for a period of time, hey, maybe you shouldn't just randomly start walking up to women and hitting on them when they're in spaces where they might just be shopping or doing yoga and not want to be approached and sexualized. That's a perfectly fair thing to say. To then solve that by going, okay, then don't talk to women at all, is problematic. But I can certainly understand if you're a young woman who's been raised in an environment where a man coming up to you and saying, hi, I think you're very attractive and I wanted to see if you might want to get together with me sometime, is perceived as a form of assault, is a problem. So I just think, again, that if we continue to look at, why would you want to have sex with your enemy? Why would you, if you've been conditioned to believe that this person is your oppressor, why would you want to have sex with them, women or men? If young men are being taught that women are the problem and young women are being taught that men are the problem in heterosexual relationships, why would you want to have sex with each other?
Let's,
Can I just push back on that? I think that's being a little extremist. Men and women don't all think that they are the enemy. I think there is still a lot of camaraderie. People still want to get married. There are just way fewer opportunities to actually develop real relationships with people. And when
you say real relationship, you mean like in person, in real life,
and meaningful. When you see someone over a repeated amount of time, you get to know them. You get to know their good side, their bad side. You sort of have these opportunities to flirt. You have these opportunities to get to know, is this the right person for me? And we just don't have those types of opportunities as much anymore.
Can I ask, because I know you read like a dating column as well for Teen Vogue, and
it sounds like you're begging for content.
And
if nobody's dating or nobody's going out.
No, I actually disagree with that profoundly. I think that young people and young women who tend to be the ones to write into this column, do want to have sex. They do want to have love. I think, as you mentioned, these are fundamental human desires. I just think that the question of risk is so high.
Yeah.
I do think that for young women, going out with a man is like rolling the dice.
Sure.
That could result in being a little disrespected at best and having something super egregious happen to you.
I'm not at all questioning that feeling, but I'm curious for the two of you, how do you respond to that? Because it seems like when you go out on a date now, because people have social media, people are much more known quantities than they would have been
I totally
30
disagree.
or 40 or 50 years ago. Where you might,
Or they have a very performative self out there that may not in any way
yeah,
be
sure,
accurate.
but it's. It just seems. Do you think that people like meeting on a date now? They're more anonymous.
They're safer than they've ever been. Their location's being tracked. They can give their friends
this
their
is what I'm
information.
saying. So.
But I see the question I wanted to ask you, because I wouldn't know from my lived experience, and you might, as someone not only from lived experience but also as speaking to that group of Teen Vogue readers, which I imagine is mostly young women. In my generation, and I don't know if this is a foreign concept or if this is still a thing, and that's part of my question, there was this idea of like the bases when you were dating somebody. Like you would meet someone, you'd flirt with each other, then you'd go out, maybe there'd be a kiss. That's first base, Second base was like, over the clothes stuff maybe. Third base, we're starting to get a little more intimate. This was not all on one date. This was really not even within a compressed period of time. There was this sense of a progression. I get the impression from the young people I know that that's just not how it works anymore. That it's like first base is we have sex, third base is we exchange actual information about our families and we make plans to go out on a date. Like I'm trying to understand, how do you navigate conversations about dating if it's that chaotic and if sex has become that much of a lead thing when people expect to have any kind of romantic connection? Or is this just bad information that's being handed to an older generation?
I think that it seems like what you're saying is contrary to what the premise of the debate is, that young people aren't having that much sex. I think that Gen Z is just not a monolith, and people have like wildly different dating experiences.
I guess what I was saying is that maybe the reason
I'm
why
sure there were
people are
players in
avoiding
your
it-
generation too.
Yeah.
Tons, absolutely.
yeah.
And some of them purported to be it, and some of them hid the fact that they were, so they were closet players. But the question I guess I was having is, if you felt it was binary, right, of you either are not with someone or you're having sex with them, that you didn't have a sense of a progression of you were going to have some time to get to know this person before you had sex with them, or were even expected to have sex with them, where it would be considered poor form to have sex with them too quickly.
That actually strikes me more as something that the leading edge of the baby boom talk about. If you talk about people born between 1946 and the mid 50s, they would talk about in the late 60s and 70s, that type of expectation that you would have sex first and then get to know each other.
Right.
But even by the time I came along, years after that, that was not operative. From the young people I know, including my children, like that, the world you're describing does not seem very much in play.
At all, I think anymore.
Well, again, everybody's different.
Like Tinder, Grindr, and the myriad of other apps that are essentially like, hey, we want to hook up. If the expectation is, if I enter the dating marketplace, I have to have sex with this person, it's expected that I would have sex with this person, that makes it a much higher percentage move to allow someone into your physical space at all. Well, because if I'm saying I want to get to know you versus I want to have sex with you.
Another way of saying this is hookup culture, which was the moral panic of 10 or 15 years ago. Is hookup culture gone then?
It sounds like that's what you're describing, like hookup culture and casual sex, which I'm sure has been a thing people have been doing from time immemorial, and technology has maybe facilitated a little bit.
For sure.
What's made it easier?
I think it's in the first kind of cuneiform tablets. It's like after the...
my gay male friends are still full in on it.
Right, but that's also, it might be the place where you're at, like Grindr and Tinder are different than something like OkCupid and Hinge or whatever.
Correct.
So, Carolyn?
If casual sex is no longer the thing, then did that just not work? Are we not willing to admit that and bring something back into the conversation, something like marriage, more expectations, higher accountability for partnership, for teamwork, for commitment? Right.
It would be excellent for my business model.
Yeah. One of the things, a couple of you have talked about how there does seem to be, and to say like men and women are really, at odds with each other. This is a perennial theme, right? Of all art. It goes back certainly to the, to the Old Testament, and like most religions there's a male and a female concept, and they're kind of merging and at war with each other and things like that. But does Gen Z is more likely to identify as bisexual than older generations and things like that? Is that part of this dynamic? And if you are bisexual on one level, you would say, okay, well, that doubles my, my field of people that I could interact, or if I'm sapiosexual or whatever? Or is that actually a sign of retreat from traditional sexual roles and sexual desire?
I think that there's a broader problem with that. And it's not a retreat from something so much as it is a movement towards something. And that movement, what that movement is towards, is self-focus and individualism. I think we have just really become a society that wants to put ourselves first and is not willing to do something for the broader team. If you are married, you've made a commitment to someone, you've made a commitment to each other. And because we are so interested in ourselves and our own happiness at a sort of superficial level, we're much less willing to put up with a husband who puts dishes in the sink and doesn't load the dishwasher. The sort of normalization of divorce, of not marriage in the first place, is, I think, problematic in that aspect.
Those are very different things, and the divorce rate peaked in the early to mid 80s. So, and then we can talk about the formation of marriages or long-term relationships. But is the problem in the dating sphere, and let's start with you, and then we'll come to Malavika, is the problem that people are too individualistic?
I think there was a period of time, and I can say this as someone who was a very far left progressive in the 90s, that...
In the 1990s.
1990s,
okay.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, thank you. There was a sense of commonality and a sense that the right was the party of rugged individualism and every man for himself. And then I think we got deeper and deeper on the left into this very identity-driven concept. Well, I can't understand the experience of a trans woman because I'm not a trans woman. And a trans woman of color understands her experience, whereas a trans woman who's not of color wouldn't understand that. And a trans woman of color who is college educated would not understand the experience of a trans woman of color who's not college educated, and so on and so forth, which, if you follow this all the way down, becomes an incredible form of rugged individualism and becomes exactly what Robert Bork was pushing for, which was essentially every man for himself. So because you can't possibly understand my lived experience, what are our common dreams? Todd Gitlin in Twilight of the Common Dreams kind of predicted this in the early 2000s, saying, look, the left is now reached the point where we don't believe in anything in common anymore. We don't have any singular unifying narrative anymore that we can say we all are in support of, other than very vague concepts like love and acceptance.
So then, bringing that back to the sexual conversation, and, we started with you, we'll end the section with you, as the representative Gen Z, the unsexed generation. Is it that Gen Z is too individualized in their interpretation of their experience? So how could I ever be with anybody because they're so different then?
Right. Well, I mean, I think queerness is like a beautiful note to end this segment on. I never expected to hear on NPR that bisexuality is an escape from like men who don't do the dishes or is like a form of selfishness. I will say that like as someone who is queer, I do find that I have like a much healthier relationship to sex that is oriented around exploration as opposed to like risk management, which I think is like the condition of most of my exclusively heterosexual female peers. And I think something that I think about a lot as a queer person is that like human difference is inescapable. Like I encounter some degree of power dynamic in every person I'm in relationship with, but like for whatever reason, maybe the power dynamic doesn't feel as structural. It doesn't feel like this person has the same ability to like alter the condition of my life or treat me like a second-class citizen in the way that a man can do that to me. And I think that has created like a playing field that is just much more likely to foster connection and alternative ways of relating to one another that is like remarkably, I think, a lot warmer and more inclusive than people like to stereotype.
So can I just ask though, because most people identify as heterosexual, do you think it's impossible for somebody who identifies strongly as heterosexual to have that sense of exploration, or is heterosexuality then just part of a structural power dynamic that is going to destroy sexual relations? I
mean, I think that women who are straight like are often like incredibly courageous and creative in pioneering like alternative ways to live their lives. Like I see women who like co-adopt with their friends, who buy homes like with other women. Like it is always possible to like jailbreak from a certain way of existing.
Is that true for men as well?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's leave it there. Another aspect that comes up when discussing sex and dating is what a relationship looks like. I want to ask our panel, is monogamy overrated? Before we answer, we want to talk a little bit about ethical non-monogamy, which has become a phrase that is, in more common currency than before. Malavika, this seems to be something that Gen Z talks a lot about as our resident Zoomer. What is ethical non-monogamy to you?
I would define ethical non-monogamy as an alternative form of relating to others, where instead of having like a closed monogamous primary partner, there's a degree of openness, whether that is sexual or there's like other permutations of it as well.
And it's openly discussed. So, because there's a lot of non-monogamy going on, but it's more out there.
I think non-monogamy has had a couple of like big moments in the media lately. I think that it's something that like the queer community has like its own like long and historic relationship with that is maybe a little bit autonomous from what everyone else is doing. Okay,
well, James, your business is based on non-monogamy,
I have
right?
A PhD in infidelity. I mean, it's a huge, whether it's a cause or a symptom of the disconnection between two purportedly previously monogamous partners is a question that I don't know that I can answer. But yeah, I think there's certainly a rise now in the discourse on ethical non-monogamy and on other forms of relationship, hopefully as a function of the fact that we're just so spectacularly bad as a species at monogamy. It's a fairly, and again, I think the opportunities for infidelity have become much easier. I mean, if you listen to a song like Stevie Wonder's Part-Time Lover from the 1980s, it seems almost quaint because it's this sort of code of, how he's going to get in touch with his lover, whereas now you just can be texting your lover from, the other end of the couch while your spouse is sitting right there. But I think we know that adultery or infidelity has been around forever. I mean, it's it's actually 2 of the 10 commandments, which I find fascinating, that God allegedly could give us 10 rules, and twice he had to say, don't covet your neighbor's wife and don't commit adultery. Right. Thou shalt not kill got 1. So I think that's an interesting side note. But I think, it's certainly true that, for example, many of my gay male friends for many years have practiced some form of ethical non-monogamy where they have rules within the relationship. Now, again, that's partly a function of the fact that in queer spaces, because these were ostracized people for so many years, they could create their own permutations because they were like, I'm never going to be accepted. I can do what might make sense for our relationship.
So can I ask, do you think monogamy is overrated, or when you are seeing your clients as a divorce lawyer, it's not like they were like, oh yeah, we agreed to be non-monogamous?
Well, I think monogamy in its best form, most people would agree, is not a rule-based concept. So if I was in a romantic relationship and my partner said, I really want to have sex with a whole bunch of other guys, but I'm going to honor our promise, that's not going to make me feel great. But if my partner says, I have sex with as many men as I want to, then to me, that's a form of monogamy that makes sense. When I'm full, I stop eating. So if I'm satisfied sexually, of course, why would we be looking outside of this relationship if it can satisfy us? I am not qualified to talk about ethical non-monogamy's success rate because I'm a divorce lawyer. So I see a lot of people who try it, I think, as a Hail Mary pass at the end of a relationship that was disconnected. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of very happy people out there who would never come into my office.
Would you, before we go to Carolyn real quickly, would you say, and as somebody who sees a lot of people at their worst or in moments of deep distress, is there more of a sense of like there are different ways to be married than, say, when you yourself were married?
I mean, I think that there are people who have marriages of convenience, marriages where they're sexless, marriages. I mean, that has not changed, and I don't think that will ever change. I think that's a tradition. And, one of the things I've always said is that monogamy is a tradition. Now, some traditions are, things we do because of the wisdom of people before us that was passed down to us. And in some ways, tradition is peer pressure exerted by dead people. So to the extent that monogamy is peer pressure from dead people, it's probably not a good idea. But to the extent that it's a relationship permutation that actually makes sense and helps our species thrive in some ways, or where if Freud is right in Civilization and its discontents, that it's one that prevents chaos, then that might be a good thing. I don't know that I'm qualified to say. I just know we're bad at it.
Carol?
Yeah, I think let's not overthink this. First of all, we are a panel that suffers from a lot of selection bias. Non-monogamy actually does not happen at very high rates. Polygamy specifically happens at very low rates of like 2%.
How would we know
about this
that? I'm
all the
sorry.
time. We have survey data to show this.
So people who answer surveys say
Yes.
they're being monogamous?
That's correct.
I mean, that feels like that might be a problem, right? I don't know a lot of people that are going to sign up and be like, yes, I'm doing a lot of sex outside my marriage.
There are all sorts of surveys, all sorts of census data, all sorts of data that we can use to study this. And in terms of marriage not working, that's actually not true. It's not perfect.
I don't know.
but
Bought me a Rolex. I mean,
it
that's
is-
crazy.
No, but again, I mean, divorce rates are lower than they were
Yeah,
in the
that's an
mid-80s.
absolutely hilarious statistic. that
Why-
you
why
cited,
is that a
because
hilarious
that's the number of
statistic?
marriages that catastrophically fail, and that's at about 47%.
Yeah,
It
but
hovers
that
between
end in divorce.
Then there are, catastrophically fail and end in divorce. Then there's another, according to the latest research, 10 to 20% of people that are physically separated, no longer living together, but just didn't get around to filing an actual final divorce. So now we've got something that fails roughly 67% of the time.
So, but you're
And
saying
wait, hold
that's
on, let's
higher.
add one more onto this. Now we've got people that stay together and hate each other. And don't like each other. And there's another research that says another 10 to 15%.
This is the divorce lawyer, and you're saying, so there are no good marriages because we're at like 110% of marriages that are either end catastrophically or.
No, we're somewhere in the area of like 87%.
But there's all of the data shows that divorce is lower now than it was in
finalization of the entry of a judgment of divorce.
Which certainly counts for something.
Well, it could be that people just aren't filing for divorce. 10 to 20% of them are just going out for milk and never coming back.
But if they're not filing for divorce, then that matters too. At the end of the day, marriage is
it doesn't.
not.
Who signed on to get married to say we'll be miserable with each other, but we'll survive this endurance event without entering a judgment of divorce?
should marriage still be the goal?
Yes.
And marriage and monogamy.
Monogamy
Okay,
should still be the goal.
Explain the connection between marriage and monogamy as you see it.
Yeah, so marriage, you're making a commitment to be exclusively sexual with one person, but it's more than that. You are making a commitment to a partnership. You are making a commitment often to raise a child, and it is not perfect. It's hard. I'm almost married a year, so thankfully it's been very
Almost
great
a
for
year.
me. Yes,
Almost a year,
It'll be
yeah.
a month from now. But look, there's a reason that this has been the primary model for so long, and all of these other alternative models are frankly peripheral. We can objectively try to understand whether or not monogamy and marriage specifically is overrated. We can look at what we want to get out of relationships, happiness, life satisfaction, what we sort
Economic
of value
security,
in our life.
career help, et cetera. Carolyn, as a millennial, how is this a generational kind of dynamic that you see at work among your friends and colleagues or the people that you kind of do research on? Because this is oftentimes people talk about, generations go from one extreme to another, et cetera. And millennials tended to be oftentimes were the children of divorced parents. That was more common. So can you put the interest in marriage and monogamy in a generational context?
I think my generational cohort is probably mixed, but statistically, people support marriage in every generation, and millennials are no different. The vast majority of Americans support marriage and think that marriage is the best model. Whether or not they think it's perfect is a different question. Yes, a lot of millennials sort of have this experience of parents being divorced, and maybe for some that gives an appreciation for marriage, but you could just as well see the alternative to that. I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to have kids. And that is something that I think we at least read about a lot in the popular media, are millennial women afraid to have children for sake of traumatizing them because, all of us successful women whose parents were divorced are so traumatized that we haven't been able to keep jobs, or, I mean, it's sort of silly, like the trauma narrative. Like, if you're really not going to have children because your parents got divorced, there are bigger problems in the world.
Okay. Malavik?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the question of monogamy, I think as someone from a generation who is still building our worldviews and for whom possibilities aren't foreclosed, I do think quite existentially about what the point of a marriage is. And I think a lot of us would say like love and companionship, and I think that's a beautiful and true ideal for many. But I also view it as like a form of protection above all else. Like I view it as, for many people, an economic calculation that they make, because for a very long time, like American society has oriented towards like a partnership where the man is usually the one who does the labor under capitalism and the woman is the one who does the reproductive and sexual and emotional labor at home. And that is no longer the case. Like, the economy is tough. A lot of women like do work, which I think is a great thing, but also data shows that when these women come home, regardless of how much they out-earn their husbands, they're still the ones doing like the lion's share of like domestic labor.
Can I just say that's actually not, it's yes and no. It wasn't the case that women were always these ubiquitous trad wives who all stayed at home. You really had a lot of white, wealthy women who wanted to sort of shed the bourgeois values and be able to do more of what they wanted. But this was not sort of a unified movement. Black women were much more concerned about wage gaps, about work protection, labor protections, and that's because they were already in the workforce.
Right.
So this idea that marriage didn't need to be for everyone was, I think, actually most detrimental for the women who had least to gain for new opportunities in the workforce, but most to lose from the idea that men had no obligations to women.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that we all as women like deserve like a sense of like safety and dignity that for many comes from the ability to provide for yourself. For some has come from marriage or a combination of the two. And I think that for young women, it's just very clear that marriage may not be the best source of like financial protection and dignity, especially when we see these questions of how labor is distributed.
Well, and increasingly women, particularly single women and younger women, are not only more likely to be employed, but are doing better in the workplace.
Right, and the fact that you might have a job and like still have a man at home too, to like bring back the metaphor, doesn't do the dishes. Like I don't blame anyone who like is.
I don't know why you're looking at James when you say that, but
I do with the dishes.
Oh no,
he doesn't take the garbage out though.
Marriage rates are actually going up though; they're not going down.
Right.
So that theory, which is that women's agency, autonomy, economic viability, that's all going up. Right, they don't need it, but they're getting married more.
Right.
So the interesting thing about that is women are still desiring marriage, because last time I checked, it wasn't mandatory. And they are, in fact, now doing it for some reason other than economic security. And the interesting thing, I think no one likes to talk about when talking about marriage statistics and divorce statistics, and I had a debate with Matt Walsh on the Daily Wire about this, is that people were talking a lot about we need to get rid of no-fault divorce, and that's what we should be doing. The reality is that has to do with barriers to exit. I mean, arguably you should make barriers to entry. But I would take it a step further and just simply say, you know, when people marry, if you want the marriages to last, if you look at the data actually says that if people have housing stability, if people have a wage gap that isn't so extreme that people are able to maintain economic viability, people who have college education are significantly less likely to divorce. So a lot of this,
They're also more likely to get married.
I hate to sound a bit like there is no war but the class war. Fundamentally, if you want people's basic living conditions to improve, that will improve marriage outcomes, because people are still getting married. 86% of people get remarried within 5 years of their divorce. That's someone who went through a catastrophic failure of this technology and they sign on for it again. So it serves some purpose for us, and we love it as a society for some reason.
Very quickly, Carolyn, explain.
I just think you have the reverse causality there. We want to change living environments, but who is supposed to do that? Government? I think marriage is a way to change living environments. Marriage is a way to create stronger financial stability that leads to better housing.
Marriage isn't going to solve economic issues of core instability and massive income inequality in the United States. It's not the slightest bit going to solve that problem.
But when you're talking about a household level, how do you expect individuals to change this? Marriage is...
theoretically, democracy. So democracy, theoretically, is you'd have people getting together.
You're arguing more that marriage is fundamentally a cultural phenomenon, not a political phenomenon, and it's not going to respond even, to, it's not the marriage tax break that is the reason why people either form or leave marriage.
That's right.
So how do you explain the rise in marriage rates over the past, few decades where, more people are choosing to get married? Is that a cultural revival, or is it what's going on?
I think we should be specific about who is choosing to get married, and that is wealthier, better educated groups. Marriage rates are still lower than in lower income groups than they are in higher income groups.
But still rising within those groups. Within those cohorts, they're still rising. They're rising across every demographic.
Because you're always going to have people who understand that there is a benefit to being a team. You're always going to have people who know that this is the best way to raise a family and want to raise a family. And so I think on the margin, you're going to see that.
It's like drugs don't need drug dealers, drugs sell drugs. Like marriage doesn't need to be sold to people. There's something about this that we like.
So I want to push back against what you said earlier about marriage not being mandatory, because I don't necessarily think that that's true. Like legally it's not, but I think that right now, like there are just very few viable alternatives for people to have the safety and dignity in an incredibly precarious world, which I think we all agree it's like really precarious right now.
I don't actually, but
I'm
willing to take, no.
I mean, for many Americans, like a health issue could like bankrupt you. Like,
but that has always been the case, and the thing that is remarkable about
how would heterosexual marriage bolster that in some way that a polycule couldn't, or a group of people living together in a non-married situation?
No, but any kind of...
we don't know that that's true.
Any kind of union could.
Well, what you're saying is that many hands light work. Like there's a lot of ways for people to share the burdens that are created. So, but marriage is a very specific legal...
only option.
100%.
But it is one that's legally and socially incentivized.
Those legally incentivized, how so? Because I make my living in the incredible risk. One could make a very cogent argument that marriage is an inherently negligent activity. Negligence is defined as a failure to perceive a substantial and unjustifiable risk of serious harm. Anyone who's been divorced will tell you it's seriously harmful. So, and now there's over 50% chance of it catastrophically failing. So it's a negligent, arguably reckless activity.
This is all you see. I mean, I don't know that
these
you're
are
the
numbers.
Best.
These are numbers.
Yeah, but...
when you talk to trauma researchers, they often say rates of trauma are very high.
Yeah.
And that's because
it's all I see at day, every word.
People who have long-term trauma conditions, not the entire population.
But wait, you guys do know, like math is math. Marriage is more likely to end in divorce than death. All marriages end. I'm sorry to tell you as the newlywed. Your marriage will end. I hope it ends in death.
But they're less likely to end in divorce than they were in the mid-'80s.
And
that is correct, by about 3%.
No, but
if I said there's a 47% chance when you walk out today you're going to get hit with a bowling ball, you'd walk out of here without a helmet on?
What I'm saying is that the divorce rate is lower than it used to be. And if marriage rates are going up, something has changed, and I don't think we've quite figured out how that's happening if, in fact, marriage is so awful.
But if we combine what you're saying about how different relationship permutations are on the rise and are much more socially acceptable, particularly among young people, why then are we signing on for one that we know ends catastrophically most of the time?
Well, the other ones also
do not work.
Can we say that?
Yes,
we'll end this segment, but I think what we can say is that all permutations of relationships tend to end the longer they go on, right? So it's like polycules. There are some polycules that I'm sure are in their fourth decade. Most of them are not. And just like most relationships, whether you're living together or you're married or whatever.
Look, marriage is complicated enough with one person. When we're talking about alternative living arrangements, alternative relationships, you're only adding to that.
Or you're diffusing responsibility.
Okay, we're going to close this segment out just very, very quickly. Yes or no, with half a sentence. Is monogamy over?
No.
No.
No, but it could be.
Okay, very good. So our next segment is: should people have more babies? The U.S. saw record low birth rates this year, according to the CDC. the Centers for Disease Control. This is being credited to women delaying pregnancy and having fewer children overall. Carolyn, let's hear from you first. Should people have more babies?
I think people should have babies if they want. I don't think it's a good idea to force people to have babies, but I do think that we could be more honest with women and let them know that they are realistically on a timeline. And I'm not sure that we have been as honest in the past as we could be. And I think a lot of millennial women, especially right now, are feeling like, I waited too long and I didn't know that this would be the outcome.
What would be the outcome?
Not being able to have children.
Okay. James, do you think we should be worried about low birth rates?
Well, that's a different question. I mean, I don't think anyone should be having
Well,
babies.
should we be having more babies?
I think anyone who wants to have babies should have babies. I don't think anyone who doesn't want to have babies should have babies. But I think you shouldn't wait until you're ready to have a baby, because I don't think you're ever ready to have a baby. I say that as someone who had a baby at 24. And I was totally not ready. We were totally not ready, but we had a baby and we figured it out in some way. And I think what younger generations are doing.
And you got divorced.
We got divorced, but it wasn't because of the babies. Actually, we're still super close because of the babies who are now grown men, and we have a wonderful relationship. We raised 2 children as divorced parents from the age of 5 and 7 when we divorced.
I hear you, and I feel you.
I do not consider the fact that I got divorced as a function of the fact that we had babies. We had babies when we were not ready to have babies, and that didn't take a toll on the marriage. That actually was something that bonded us pretty closely and has kept us bonded for many, many years post-divorce. What I was saying about marriage and children is we've created for people this sense that if you don't do it perfect, don't do it at all. So wait till you're economically stable, wait until you've fully self-actualized, wait until you've found your perfect partner, had some years alone with them to enjoy and travel and Instagram the things that you've been doing, and now you'll be ready to have babies, and it does not work with the actual ticking clock of biological reality.
Do you feel like that is a quintessential Gen X insight, as opposed to, not waiting, or you're making it up as you go along?
No, what I think is that we were less risk adverse, and I think we had less people telling us we were doing it wrong. I think the internet is telling everyone that they're doing it wrong all the time, and what I will say is, again, if you really care about declining birth rates, create economic conditions for young people where they can have children. Create economic conditions where people don't have to be married to have children, where people who are young and married can have children and will have a place to live and a wage that's payable and health insurance that will help cover the pregnancy. If older generations like ours care about young people having babies the way we all claim to, everyone's all got their arms up about, oh my God, the birth rates are going down. Okay, so let's create economic conditions for young people where they are going to be able to have babies.
Okay, let's wait. Before we go, we'll come back to birth rates, because this is also a global phenomenon that complicates what you're talking about. Malavika, what's your response when you hear people say, we need to be having more babies? We need to be having more babies.
Well, first of all, my question is who should be having more babies? Because I think this is a very, when people say this, especially in America, to me, I don't ever hear anything but a eugenicist, racist fear that the white population is going down, because when Black women, women of color, poor women, migrant women are having babies, they hate to see it. They're called irresponsible. So I think any question about birth
Who is
rate,
calling them irresponsible?
Society.
Okay.
Yeah, and I agree actually with James that I think that there's remarkable diversity in what people want, and given the chance via economic guarantees of safety and dignity for all, people would make a wide variety of choices.
The problem is we can't really do that except culturally. The expectation.
We can't do what? Change the birth rates?
Set up the economic conditions for that. I think that the types of solutions that people are talking about are things like free childcare or minimum wages or paid
guaranteed
leave.
Housing, things like that.
Yeah, but you're saying those as if I was saying levitation.
No, but none of those policies has worked in any of the places where they've been tried, whether you're talking about Singapore
in the permutations
or
they've
France.
been tried.
Okay, so real natalism has not been tried yet.
Not that real natalism hasn't been tried, but I think that we could, within this culture, I can only speak within the context of Western culture and the United States specifically. But in an elected democracy, if people are genuinely concerned that people aren't having children, and we all agree that having children and having those children be educated and having e pluribus unum, having many cultures, a great melting pot where people come together and all feel safe and all have a high quality of life. We can't solve the problem of childcare. We can't solve the problem.
But that's the question is that going to increase childbirth rates? And there's no evidence that it would.
This is a profoundly like anti-child and like anti-mother country. And
how quantify that a little bit?
I mean, I think that like, for example, like right now we're seeing, well, I will say this, a statistic that always makes me feel good is the fact that like teen pregnancy is going down. And like conservatives have been having like losing their minds about this fact.
Not about teen birth rates, but about birth rates.
Well, teen birth rates too.
Okay.
I think that might be a little bit of echo chambery. I get it too, so, but I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think any conservatives are pro-teen pregnancy.
Yeah.
Well, you know, maybe different people have different points of view, but what, so continue that thought though, that, you know, it's a good thing that fewer teenagers or unwanted pregnancies, broadly speaking, are down, particularly among younger people.
Yeah. So
that's a good thing.
I think that's
I guess, let me reframe the question slightly. Is it a problem that more women are having fewer children? Because this is also a global phenomenon.
Well, here's one reason it is a problem. If we want things like childcare, then we are going to have to take from the workforce somewhere else. We also have an aging population. We also want mental health workers everywhere. There are only so many people. And so if we want these solutions, then we need people to carry out these solutions. And so you fundamentally
But we don't say that about food. Like we've massively increased food production, and the percentage of people directly involved in farming or production of food is like 1 or 2%, where it used to be 70, 80%.
I'm not ruling out any type of technological change. I think that that's perfectly possible, but right now, this is what we're facing.
James?
Yeah, I still don't understand the argument, because I just have to say, I think we have the means to do all kinds of amazing things. I say, as a wealthy New Yorker, if you raised my taxes and you could show me that that was going to help people with food stability, housing stability, it was going to help young people get educational programs that would help them, further their lives and be able to have children.
What does that have to do with women having more children?
Because women are trying to
globally, the correlation, which is very stark, and conservative writers have pointed this out again and again, that as women gain more years of education, which is a proxy for equality of opportunity and legal protection and standing and things like that, they have fewer children. That's why globally, in virtually every country, whether poor or rich, there are fewer women. So all I'm saying is your argument for a larger social welfare net has nothing to do with how many children are being born.
I totally disagree. Because females of every species make their nest and give birth to their babies where it is safe and not dangerous, right? We have created a society where it is very dangerous for a woman to give birth to children. And I believe that if you create economic...
That's a ridiculous overstatement. But beyond that, how do you explain in the EU, and particularly in the wealthiest countries of the EU with the most extensive child care programs for children, they have the lowest birth rates? So places like Italy, places like France, these are not unsafe places. These are places that shower mothers and families with young children, all kinds of welfare spending, and it has no effect.
I don't see this as a problem or a contradiction.
I don't see it as a problem.
I think on one hand, people who choose to have children should be able to do so in conditions of safety and dignity, and I think we have different opinions. I'm not in the same tax bracket as you by far, but I think that's great. Like, I have thoughts that you probably don't want to hear about where we could get the money for childcare and for dignity for children and mothers. And I think on the other hand, and I think on the other hand, it's also true that like when given more opportunities, women can make a broader array of choices of what to do with their lives. And I do think that having a child for many women across history was the only way you could have dignity or provide something to society. When women have more options, like I refuse to believe that fundamentally motherhood is the most exciting or best thing that a woman could do with her life. And like, if you're given the chance to like do something else with your life, I understand that people would take that chance.
We also really tried mothers. I mean, we have always sort of looked down on motherhood, though.
On what planet
we have.
We're talking about Chevrolet, apple pie, mom, Chevrolet, and apple pie. I mean, moms are the cornerstone of American society.
Mothers. Yeah. We make motherhood the highest.
This might be a gender difference.
Maybe it is a gender difference, but I think we've always sort of looked at stay-at-home moms as lesser than.
Who's the we?
And society. American
society has looked down on stay-at-home mothers?
Down on stay-at-home mothers.
As compared, well, it's not surprising that capitalism believes that people who aren't contributing to the labor force and aren't the economic engine aren't the best thing, and that what we should do instead would be a better choice.
So you're arguing from an anti-capitalist point of view that we need to spend more so that moms can opt out of the labor economy.
Well, no, the reality is that women are, I actually don't believe that there can be a reallocation of resources, which I think we all know
is this money coming from?
Taxes, which is where all of our money comes from, and it can come from any different. I mean, do you really have the reductionist view that it's like, oh no, this is the fixed amount of money we have, and it has to go to all these places? So what column will you take it from?
No, not at all. I just have a realistic view about what government is capable of, and I don't believe that government is capable of solving all of our problems. We also
we can agree on that, but you can't agree that they could reallocate resources to childcare. And by the way, to answer your earlier point, what's happening in the European Union? By the way, it could be that in various, like Singapore's reasons for not having children versus the United States reasons for not having children could be dissimilar and don't have to be connected to each other, right? Like the proliferation of cigarette smoking in one country versus another is not a function of now this is global how we're feeling. Yes, the birth rates are down in various places, but they might not be down for the exact same reasons. When you ask women about what it is that they want, younger women, motherhood is lower on the list now.
That's right.
When you ask women in their 30s and 40s and 50s who haven't had children, do you regret not having children? The numbers are going up and up and up and up. And by the way, look at the proliferation of reproductive related technologies where women later in life now say, hey, I didn't want kids before, or I wasn't able to have kids.
So this is a wonderful success story then, because instead of, you're essentially agreeing with Carolyn, because women have more choices, and it's like if women are having, there are fewer teen births, but there are more births to women in their late 30s or early 40s.
But that technology is not as successful as people presume it is.
It's abysmally unsuccessful.
No,
but it's getting better, right? It certainly is.
From its awful baseline.
Of course, yeah.
Well, what? You got to start somewhere, right? And isn't it better that some
having babies at a time where your body is most primed for having babies and creating conditions where people feel like they could do that and might be inclined to do so? Feminism was always about women being able to choose what they wanted, whether
and
they
also
wanted
being
to be
emancipated,
a mother or a worker or both.
Being emancipated from biological strictures, right? Because this is what
From
birth
rigid
control.
biological strictures.
Yeah, birth control allows women more control over the reproductive system, as well as so does IVF, and so do other forms of reproductive technology. So you can say, it's bad.
The success rate of birth control versus IVF is, you can't even compare those two technologies in terms of percentages.
But, they are improving. IVF is improving. That's all.
From its abysmally low baseline, yes.
The baseline always starts at zero. Let me ask real quick as a kind of finish to this segment, why are women having children later? And this is something that is fascinating. And through about the early 70s, the typical first live birth was to a woman in her teens. They were typically 18 or 19. No longer the case. The average age, and I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's in the mid-20s, and it's always inching upwards. Why are women having children later in life?
Because we have more choice. Like every single time, like I'm at the club, I am so grateful I don't have a baby at home. Like every time I'm like, I don't know, like out for dinner with my friends, I'm like, I'm not buying diapers. Like I just think that having like just like so many choices available to me.
You can bring kids to restaurants, by the way.
Yeah, but I don't want to.
Okay. What about you?
I think we shouldn't give women the sense, though, that they have a choice when they don't. And we should be careful about sort of where we're drawing the line. If women knew how unsuccessful these alternatives are, then they might actually feel as if they've been given a false choice. I can work later, I can work longer, I can wait to have children. And then when they get to that point, they don't actually have the choice.
I guess I would say as a queer person, like having like a biological baby has never been like the most important thing to me. And I will also say something I'm surprised hasn't come up yet, and I guess I'll say it, is like climate change is like a profound existential threat, like facing like future generations. And I do sometimes think, like I'm not convinced that it is like even moral, let alone necessary, to bring more first world babies onto this overburdened planet.
I think taking that perspective reduces our accountability to solve the problem in some ways, because we're less invested in success.
Yeah, and I didn't say that like not having children like relieves me of like the possibility for care for future generations. I think that I don't have to like pop a kid out myself to like have that relationship with like a younger person, or to like still be a mother or a caretaker in some way.
James?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to tell.
Was it nuclear
I'm not
war?
going to tell
Was it
two women that they should be having babies. What I will say is that.
Well, why do women who have children have them later in life?
Well, I think women are waiting until they're more stable. I think they're waiting until they have their education completed. I mean, the number of women going to college has gone significantly up. Graduate school, opportunities are much greater for women than they were even in my generation. So I think that a lot of young women are focusing on themselves, and they're focusing on themselves in the fun ways that you're talking about, going to the club, going out to a restaurant, enjoying time with friends, traveling, doing all the wonderful fun things that the world is filled with the opportunities to do. And they're also being responsible. You've written books, you've taught, you do all, you're doing things that require real work and effort. So you're playing and you're working. Where does a screaming infant fit into that situation? Where does a creature that throws up on you fit into that? I can tell you, if all we're presenting to people is look at how unbelievably burdensome children are, and they are burdensome, believe me. The reality is we're not presenting to them also that, but they're also wonderful and they're also lovely. And it's an investment you have to make in something that's quite awful for a period of time and quite burdensome for a period of time. And you don't get to go to the club and you don't really get to go out and eat unless you want to irritate everybody else in the restaurant. But you know what? When they're little and they start to like grow into this wonderful creature, and you love them so much and they love you so much. And in some ways it's also really nice because, humanity continues. Like, we have to make babies in order for that to happen. And in order to make babies, we have to have sex. So we find ourselves full circle again at the reality of trying to find some balance between the competing demands of enjoyment of life and hedonism and fun, and I don't say hedonism is a negative thing, and also the responsibility of trying to create a society and create conditions where people can live lives that are a mixture of pleasure and responsibility.
We're going to end this.
I'm only the second or third generation of women in my family for whom like there is any option besides like pregnancy and like motherhood as like the only thing I would be able to contribute to the world, my only sense of self-worth. And I don't blame young women who are looking for alternatives. Like, this is an experiment. It's going to be messy. Like, not everything is going to turn out right. But like, I've seen the alternative, and the last thing I would do is like fault anyone who's looking for something different.
But I also would go so far as to say I think you'd probably have exceptional kids.
Can I ask?
I think if you raised kids and you raised them with the ideas that you talk about, I mean, you already are spending time kind of offering a quasi-parenting perspective to a bunch of women who read your column and who could learn from you. And I think when you're a parent, you have this wonderful, I mean, the Black Panther Party constantly talked about the fact that one of the most revolutionary acts a revolutionary can do is have as many children as possible.
That is a terrible model to follow, and if I would recommend reading the memoirs of female Black Panthers.
I have.
Most of whom have
I
left
wasn't
the party.
For the Black Panthers.
No, but I'm saying that if there is a patriarchal revolutionary society culture within America, it was in the Black Panther Party. So, okay, before we wrap up, we're going to do a lightning flash round. I'm going to ask a question, and I want quick yes or no answers. Are dating apps the best way to meet people?
No.
No.
I have no idea.
Okay. Should we bring back singles events like speed dating?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do them for my friends.
No. Would you ever have a relationship with multiple people at once?
Yeah.
No, and husband, if you're listening.
You mean a sexual relationship?
A relationship.
Well, I have relationships with lots of people.
Okay, so sexual
relationship.
Yeah, sure.
No.
Okay. Are date nights still essential to a relationship, to a committed relationship?
I think they're very helpful.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
I was told that term is really gross, but yes.
Why
It just doesn't sound cool. It makes you sound like an old person, sorry.
Well, the world is getting older.
I know.
And you are getting older, so get used to it. Should men pay for the first date?
I am of the mind, yes.
What about homosexual dates? Should
Among
men
two men?
pay the first date for the first date?
Should lesbians bring a man along so he has to pay? No. No, I think that in its seriousness, I am of the mind in heterosexual relationships that, yes, I'm of the generation where men pay, but I understand the argument that there should not be that obligation.
Bracketing this to kind of more conventional heterosexual situation, should men pay for the first date?
Yes, only so that we have a norm and people know what to follow.
I think whoever asks should pay.
All right, very good. Okay, to quote the movie When Harry Met Sally, which have we all seen that?
No.
Okay. Can men and women be friends? Can men and women be platonic friends?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but not best friends.
I don't have enough data.
Okay, related to this, can you be friends with an ex?
I am.
No.
I'm friends with all of my exes.
Yeah, but how close?
Quite close.
But not that
There's
close.
such a thing as too close.
Okay,
There is such a thing as too close. I don't think I have a too close relationship with any of them.
would you call someone you're dating on the phone without texting first?
Yes, but it's generational. Yes.
Yes.
I do.
What's an acceptable age gap in relationships?
I find eroticized power imbalances to be really gross. So like small,
So what's that mean?
like
6 months?
like 3 years.
3 years?
What if the woman was older than the man?
I still think it's weird. I think you should pick on someone your own size.
No, I think a decade.
I think it's stage rather than age. So I think the difference between a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old is a massive difference, whereas the difference between a 50-year-old and a 70-year-old in terms of lived experience.
What about a 30-year-old and a 50-year-old?
I think there's still a significant gap in their life experience and the stage of their life that they're in. But if they were both divorced people who had children, for example, that might be, I think it's more stage than age. I just think reducing it to a number is a very linear way of approaching it. And I think there's more complexity than that.
Empirically, smaller age gaps are better.
Okay. By better, you mean more successful.
It's more successful than
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, here we go. Final lightning round question. Who has a harder time dating? Gen Xers and Boomers or Gen Zers and Millennials?
I speculate Gen Zers and Millennials.
I think boomers.
I think it's just hard out here.
Fair enough. Okay. That's it for the flash round. Now we are going to wrap up. I have one final question for each of you, and it's the same one. What's your one piece of dating advice for folks at any age? Malavika, we'll start with you because you are a dating advice columnist, right?
I guess when I'm imagining like the audience of young women that I usually think about, I would say that dating and romance is like a great adventure, but you need to be able to fill your cup from many sources.
I'd say state your intent.
I think it would be my life advice for people, which is the hard thing to do and the right thing to do are almost always the same thing. So being authentically yourself in relationship is harder than being performative, but it's the right thing. Being candid with your partner is the hard thing, but it's the right thing. So the hard thing to do and the right thing to do are almost always the same thing.
All right. Thank you again, James, Carolyn, Malavika. It was a pleasure having you join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week. A big thank you to you, our audience, for tuning in. This episode was made possible thanks to a generous gift from Liberty Ears Foundation. Our work is also made possible by listeners like you, the Rosencrantz Foundation, and supporters of Open to Debate. Robert Rosencrantz is our founder. Our CEO is Leah Mathau. I'm Nick Gillespie. We'll see you next time on Open to Debate.